They say houses can't breathe, but Emma Hartley swore the Lancaster Manor exhaled cold air the moment she crossed its gates. The iron creaked shut behind her like a final warning, and the sprawling mansion loomed ahead, cloaked in ivy and shadow. It wasn't just the silence that unsettled her, it was the feeling that the walls were listening, watching. What was meant to be a second chance felt more like a carefully laid trap. Hired as a nanny for Noah Lancaster, the fragile and silent son of the elusive Victor Lancaster, Emma quickly realized this was no ordinary household. Locked doors, hushed whispers, and a child who seemed more haunted than ill. There were no answers here, only carefully buried secrets. But houses don't keep secrets on their own. Someone, or something, was pulling the strings. And as Emma's steps echoed through the cold halls, she wondered if she had been brought here for Noah's sake, or for something far more dangerous. Some doors should never be opened. Emma's hands trembled as she unfolded the heavy cream-colored letter. The paper felt expensive, embossed with a golden emblem, two serpents entwined around a single blooming rose. The handwriting was impossibly elegant, every curve deliberate, as if the writer had never rushed a day in their life. Miss Emma Hartley. Her name looked strange, almost out of place on such fine stationery. It felt like a mistake, a cruel joke aimed at a woman who had spent most of her life scraping by. Emma wasn't used to elegance. Her world was cheap fabrics, second-hand furniture, and bills that never stopped coming. But the signature at the bottom was unmistakable: Victor Lancaster. Everyone in the city knew the name. The man was a ghost in high society, visible only through whispered stories. A millionaire, a widower, and now the father of a mysteriously ill child. Emma had heard passing rumors, none of which seemed relevant to her own life, until now. The offer was almost too good to be real. A live-in nanny position for his son, Noah. A salary that didn't make sense for the role. Private quarters inside the Lancaster estate. And one condition: total discretion. Too generous, too convenient. Emma's gut twisted. Offers like this didn't just fall into the laps of women like her, not without a catch, but still here it was, waiting. Her apartment walls seemed to close in tighter as she glanced around the dim room. The unpaid rent notice on the kitchen counter glared back at her. Her sister's tuition fees were due. The grocery list on the fridge remained untouched. What choice did she really have? Emma carefully folded the letter, tracing the golden emblem with her thumb. It seemed to shimmer under the weak light bulb, like a warning or maybe a promise. Tomorrow, she would step into a world built for people far above her. But something told her that once she crossed that threshold, she wouldn't come back the same. And yet, she couldn't say no. Not now. Not anymore. The iron gates groaned as they slowly opened, revealing the Lancaster estate in the pale morning light. Emma tightened her grip on the handle of her worn suitcase, the wheels dragging across the gravel as she stepped onto the long, winding driveway. Towering trees lined the path, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers, casting distorted shadows over the cracked stones. At the end of the path, the manor loomed. It wasn't just large, it was imposing. Dark stone walls stretched upward, windows like hollow eyes, watching her every move. Ivy clung to the bricks in thick, tangled veins, as if trying to suffocate the house itself. The air felt colder here, as though the mansion exhaled a breath that chilled her to the bone. A figure appeared at the massive oak doors, a woman, tall and thin, dressed in muted grey, with sharp features that seemed carved from stone. Her posture was stiff, her expression unreadable. "You must be Miss Hartley," the woman said, her tone clipped and efficient. "I am Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper. Mr. Lancaster is away on business. I'll show you to your quarters." No welcome, no smile. Emma followed, her footsteps echoing off the marble floors as they entered the grand foyer. The air inside was stifling, heavy with the scent of old wood and something faintly metallic. Oil paintings of unsmiling ancestors lined the walls, their gazes following her. The silence was deafening. No laughter, no voices, only the soft, mechanical ticking of a distant clock. As they moved deeper into the house, Emma noticed the doors, so many doors. Heavy, dark wood, all closed, some even locked. "Many rooms in this house are off limits," Mrs. Whitmore said flatly, as if reading Emma's thoughts. Emma nodded slowly, though a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Mrs. Whitmore led her up a narrow staircase to a small, dimly lit room. A modest bed, a wardrobe, and a single window overlooking the dense forest behind the manor. "This is yours, Mrs. Whitmore announced, already turning to leave. "Dinner is at 7. Do not be late." The door shut with a soft click. Emma let out a shaky breath, dropping her suitcase on the floor. The walls felt too close, the silence too loud. She moved to the window, pulling back the heavy curtain. The forest beyond swayed in the wind, dark and endless. Somewhere in that house, a child waited for her. A boy no one could seem to help. But right now, Emma wondered if she hadn't just stepped into something far more dangerous than she realized. And for the first time, she questioned if she should have come at all. Emma hesitated at the threshold of Noah's room. The door creaked slightly as she pushed it open, revealing a space bathed in muted light. The curtains were drawn halfway, casting thin slivers of sunlight across the wooden floor. The room was immaculate, too pristine for a child. Shelves lined with untouched toys, books stacked in perfect order, and a rocking horse that looked as if it had never been ridden. Noah sat by the window, small and still. His thin frame seemed to disappear into the oversized armchair, his pale face turned toward the glass, watching something far beyond the trees. His dark eyes didn't flicker when Emma stepped inside. "Hi, Noah," she said softly, careful not to startle him. Silence. Emma moved a little closer, noticing how fragile he seemed, like a shadow barely tethered to this world. His hands rested limply on his lap, fingers twitching in slow, deliberate movements, as if he were tracing something invisible on his skin. "I'm Emma. I'll be taking care of you." Still nothing. She followed his gaze to the window, but there was nothing there. Just the endless line of trees, their branches swaying in the cold breeze. "I heard you like stories," she tried again, her voice lighter. "Maybe later I can tell you one." No reaction. Emma felt an ache in her chest. This wasn't shyness, it was something deeper, heavier. On the small table beside him, she noticed a drawing, a mess of black and grey pencil strokes, harsh and frantic. Lines crossed over lines, dark spirals swallowing the page. In the corner, in shaky handwriting, was one word: listen. Emma's breath caught. She glanced back at Noah. He was staring at her now, not blinking, not breathing, just watching. A cold shiver ran down her spine. What was she supposed to listen to? The walls, the wind, or something far worse? Tell me, have you ever felt like the walls were listening? Like something unseen was waiting in the silence? If you've ever known that kind of quiet fear, share a single word below. Listen. I wonder how many of us are truly paying attention. Emma carefully placed the drawing back down, forcing herself to smile. "I'll be back later, okay?" she whispered. But Noah had already turned back to the window, lost in whatever held him there. And Emma couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was, it might be watching her too. The manor had a way of breathing. Emma could hear it in the quiet hum of the walls, in the faint creaks of old wood shifting beneath her feet. The house was alive, not in a warm, familiar way, but in the way something ancient lingers, watching, waiting. The staff moved like ghosts, silent, calculated, and always distant. Emma would catch glimpses of them in the hallways. A maid disappearing around a corner without a sound. A butler standing too still by a door, eyes fixed on nothing. Conversations would abruptly stop when she entered a room, replaced by forced smiles and lowered gazes. One evening, as the sky bled into darkness, Emma wandered toward the grand staircase. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the suffocating silence or the feeling that something was just out of sight. That's when she heard it. Soft voices, barely audible, like whispers riding the walls. Emma paused, straining to listen. The voices were coming from behind a closed door down the hall. It was one of the many rooms Mrs. Whitmore had told her were off limits. She moved closer. "Why, she's getting too close," a hushed voice murmured. A second voice responded, lower, almost trembling. "But if she finds out..." The rest was swallowed by a sudden silence. Emma's pulse quickened. She took a step back, heart pounding in her chest. The doorknob didn't move. No one came out. Had they heard her? Suddenly, the air felt heavier, pressing against her skin. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there. But the hallway was empty. Emma forced herself to breathe. Maybe it was nothing, but deep down she knew better. This wasn't just a family hiding from grief. There were secrets in this house, and she was already standing too close to them. That night, as Emma lay awake in her narrow bed, the whispers echoed in her mind. She's getting too close. Close to what? Or who? And more importantly, what would they do to keep her away? The air in the manor grew colder as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows across the hallways. Emma's footsteps echoed softly against the marble floors, the only sound breaking the suffocating silence. She had learned to walk carefully, to move without drawing attention. But tonight, something felt different. She paused near the far end of the east wing, a part of the house that always seemed colder, darker. A locked door loomed before her, its dark wood scarred by age. She had passed it many times, always feeling the weight of unseen eyes pressing against her back. Tonight, the air shifted. A faint metallic click broke the stillness. Emma's eyes darted to the floor, where something small gleamed faintly in the low light. A key. It hadn't been there before. Her throat tightened. The ornate key felt oddly warm in her palm, its intricate design eerily similar to the emblem on Victor Lancaster's letter. Two serpents coiled around a rose. Emma glanced over her shoulder. The hallway was empty, but the silence felt too deliberate, too heavy. She shouldn't. But why leave the key here if it wasn't meant to be used? Slowly, Emma slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, as if the door had been waiting. The hinges groaned in protest as she pushed the door open, releasing a rush of stale, cold air. The room beyond was cloaked in shadows. Dust particles danced in the thin slivers of moonlight that slipped through the curtains. Old furniture draped in white sheets resembled lifeless figures standing guard. But what caught Emma's attention was the wall, a massive bookshelf, filled not with books, but with boxes. Boxes, each labeled with a single year. And in the corner, a child's toy sat untouched. Emma's breath caught. This room had been sealed off for years. Then, from somewhere deep within the shadows, came the faintest sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping. Emma froze. It was coming from inside the walls. A slow, deliberate knock. 1, 2, 3. Her blood turned to ice. Some doors, she realized, are locked for a reason. And some secrets are meant to stay buried. The Lancaster Manor was suffocating in its silence. Every room seemed designed to swallow sound, trapping whispers between the walls. Emma noticed it more with each passing day. The eerie stillness, the way the staff moved like shadows, eyes always lowered, mouths tightly shut. Breakfast was the same each morning. The silverware gleamed, the table was perfectly set, but the air felt heavy. No idle chatter, no clinking of glasses, only the ticking of a distant clock. Emma tried to make conversation with the staff, small pleasantries, simple questions, but each attempt was met with cold, polite smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. "Is Noah always this quiet?" she asked one of the maids softly. The woman's hand paused mid-wipe over the polished table. Her eyes flicked to the doorway, then back to Emma. Without a word, she resumed her cleaning. The message was clear. Don't ask. Even Noah's behavior weighed on her. He didn't speak, didn't laugh. He only watched. And sometimes, Emma caught him staring at nothing for minutes on end, his small body still, his eyes distant. The walls themselves seemed to hum with unspoken words. Doors creaked as if sighing under the pressure of secrets. Footsteps echoed in empty halls. One evening, Emma passed by the servants' quarters. The door was ajar, and she caught a sliver of hushed voices. No, she's asking too many questions. He won't like it. The voices stopped the moment the floor creaked under Emma's foot. A long pause, then the door closed quietly. Emma stood there, heart pounding. What was so terrifying that none of them dared speak of it? In that crushing silence, Emma began to realize that the staff wasn't just distant. They were afraid, and now, so was she. Emma had seen Victor Lancaster only in passing during her first days at the manor. His presence was rare but commanding, like a storm looming on the horizon, silent yet impossible to ignore. The first time they truly crossed paths was in the study. Emma had been looking for Noah, but instead she found Victor standing alone near the grand fireplace. Shadows flickered across his face, sharpening the hard lines of his features. He didn't look up right away. One hand cradled a crystal glass of dark amber whiskey, the other casually rested on the mantel. The flames reflected in his cold blue eyes, but there was no warmth there. Miss Hartley. His voice was smooth, deep, and carefully measured. Emma stiffened. Mr. Lancaster, I was just looking for Noah. His gaze lifted slowly to meet hers, unwavering. Noah is delicate. He shouldn't be disturbed. There was something unnerving in the way he spoke about his own son. Detached, almost clinical. Victor stepped closer, the polished floor amplifying the deliberate sound of his shoes. His tailored suit was immaculate, not a single crease out of place. Yet for all his refinement, there was a coldness radiating from him, like steel hidden beneath silk. You'll find, he continued, swirling the liquid in his glass, that this house has rules. Rules that must be followed. Emma swallowed hard. Of course. His lips barely moved, but a faint smile crept in, sharp and without kindness. Good. Curiosity, Miss Hartley, is a dangerous thing in this house. The room seemed to darken, the air growing heavier. Victor turned away, dismissing her without a word, but Emma remained frozen. Her instincts screamed that this man wasn't merely grieving or distant. There was something much darker, coiled beneath that polished exterior. As she backed out of the study, her eyes fell on the serpent ring glinting on his hand, a perfect match to the emblem on the letter she had received. Victor Lancaster wasn't just a man in mourning. He was a man hiding something, and the more Emma saw, the more she wondered what it would cost to uncover the truth behind that carefully constructed mask. The east wing of the Lancaster Manor had always felt colder than the rest of the house. Its hallways were darker, its silence heavier. Emma had passed by the locked door at the end of the corridor more times than she could count, but tonight, something was different. The door was slightly ajar. Emma's breath caught. No one was allowed in this part of the house. Mrs. Whitmore had been clear about that. Yet the door that had always been locked now invited her in with unsettling ease. A flicker of hesitation passed through her, but curiosity clawed at her stronger than fear. Slowly, Emma pushed the door open. The room beyond was cloaked in shadows. Thick curtains suffocated the moonlight, casting the space in near darkness. Dust hung in the air like smoke. As Emma stepped inside, the wooden floor creaked beneath her weight, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. Her eyes adjusted slowly, revealing the outlines of the forgotten space. Furniture stood covered in white sheets, their shapes distorted and ghostly. But what truly drew Emma's attention was the far wall, a towering bookshelf, but instead of books, it was filled with small wooden boxes. Each box was carefully labeled with a year, the oldest dating back decades. Emma reached out and pulled one from the shelf. It was surprisingly heavy. The lid creaked open, revealing black and white photographs. Victor, but not as she knew him. In the photos, Victor stood beside a woman, elegant, with a distant smile, and a small boy, Noah, but the dates didn't make sense. Noah appeared in these photos long before he could have been born. Emma's pulse quickened. She sifted through more boxes, each revealing more photographs of Victor with a different woman and child, all eerily similar. Same setting, same cold expression. The families changed. Victor never aged. A chill ran through her. Her fingers trembled as she opened another box, this one filled with drawings, dark, frantic sketches nearly identical to Noah's, the same spirals, the same word. Listen. The walls felt closer now, as if they were listening to her every move. Then came the sound, a faint rhythmic tapping, not from the door, from inside the walls. Emma's breath turned shallow. She wasn't supposed to see this. She wasn't supposed to know. But now that she did, she realized something far worse. Someone knew she was here. Emma's hands trembled as she lifted the worn leather diary from the dusty shelf. Its cover was cracked, the once gilded edges faded with time. The initials EL were barely visible, pressed into the corner of the cover. Evelyn Lancaster, Victor's late wife. Emma carefully opened the diary. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but still legible. The first entries were simple, ordinary. Notes about Noah's birth, descriptions of the manor, fleeting mentions of Victor. But as Emma turned the pages, the tone darkened. The walls whisper at night. I hear them when Victor is away. Noah cries in his sleep, but when I ask, he says it's not his voice. Victor has locked the east wing. He says it's for my safety, but I think it's for his. Emma's grip on the diary tightened. The entries grew more frantic, the handwriting turning jagged, as if Evelyn had written in a panic. There was another child, before Noah, but no one speaks of him. Victor changes when he's alone. He watches me like he's waiting for something to happen. I found a key. I opened the door. I wish I hadn't. Emma's breath quickened. Evelyn had known. She had tried to uncover the same secrets Emma was now chasing. But something or someone had silenced her. The final entry was barely legible, the words smeared and frantic. If anyone finds this, listen carefully. He lies. The boy, he's not what he seems. Emma shut the diary, her heart pounding in her chest. What did Evelyn mean? What was Victor hiding about Noah? A creak echoed behind her. Emma froze. The door she had left open was now half closed. She wasn't alone. Clutching the diary tightly, Emma knew she couldn't stop now, but a cold realization settled in her chest. Evelyn had uncovered the truth, and it destroyed her. Would Emma be next? Emma stood silently in the doorway of Noah's room, watching him sleep. His small frame was barely visible beneath the thick blankets, yet even in rest, his body seemed restless, fingers twitching, breath shallow and uneven. She had seen illness before, but this was different. Noah's skin was pale to the point of translucency, and faint, dark veins crawled just beneath the surface, spiderwebbing up his neck. Emma's stomach turned. No doctor could explain it. That was what Victor had told her. But now, after reading Evelyn's diary, Emma wasn't so sure Noah's condition had anything to do with medicine. She inched closer, her eyes scanning the room. The air was thick, stagnant, and cold, despite the heavy drapes being drawn. Noah's sketchbook lay on the nightstand, its pages open to more frantic drawings, spirals, shadows, and that same word etched over and over. Listen. Emma knelt beside him and gently brushed a damp strand of hair from his forehead. His skin felt like ice. Noah stirred, his eyes fluttering open, but something in his gaze was distant, hollow, as though he wasn't fully awake. Who are they? He whispered, voice barely audible. Emma froze. Who, Noah? His eyes slowly shifted to the dark corner of the room. They watch me when I sleep. Emma turned, but there was nothing there. Only shadows creeping along the walls. Her breath quickened. The house was suffocating him. Not physically, but something within these walls, something unseen, was feeding off him. She remembered Evelyn's words. The boy, he's not what he seems. Emma stood, her pulse pounding. She needed answers, not from Victor, not from the staff, from the house itself, but the question clawed at her mind. Was Noah sick, or was he becoming something else? The air in the manor felt heavier now, as if the walls themselves were closing in on Emma. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the candlelight seemed sharper, more deliberate. She wasn't just being watched, she was being warned. It started subtly. A door she knew she had locked was suddenly ajar. A cold draft slipped through cracks that hadn't been there before. Small, almost forgettable things. But then the warnings became louder. Emma returned to her room late one evening to find her belongings disturbed. Her suitcase, once neatly tucked under the bed, had been dragged out. Clothes she had folded were unfolded, tossed carelessly on the floor, and on her pillow a single piece of paper. No envelope, no signature, just 2 words scrawled in jagged ink. "Stop now." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Her first instinct was to run, to pack her things and leave the manor behind. But the image of Noah's pale, fragile body kept her frozen in place. She couldn't leave him. Not now. She crumpled the note in her hand, heart pounding in her ears. Who had left it? Victor? One of the staff? Or something else entirely? Emma stepped cautiously into the hallway, scanning the shadows. The manor was as still as ever, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt full, full of eyes, full of intent. Later that night, as she tried to sleep, the sound of soft footsteps echoed beyond her door. Slow, measured. They stopped just outside her room. Emma didn't move. Minutes passed. Then the faintest sound, fingertips dragging slowly across the wood. She clutched the blanket to her chest, holding her breath. No knock, no voice, just silence. When she finally found the courage to open the door, the hallway was empty, but at her feet, another note. This time, the message was clear. Last warning. Emma knew then that whatever she was getting close to, it wasn't just a secret, it was dangerous, and someone or something would do anything to keep it hidden. The walls of the Lancaster Manor seemed to close in tighter with each passing day. Emma moved through the corridors carefully now, each step deliberate, every glance over her shoulder calculated. The warnings had become impossible to ignore. But what unsettled her most was not the threats. It was the suffocating silence from everyone around her. The staff avoided her, not out of rudeness, but out of fear. Emma could see it in their eyes, the way they flinched when she passed, the hurried steps when she entered a room. They weren't simply following orders, they were terrified. But of what? Of Victor, of the house itself. She needed answers, and she couldn't find them alone. Emma waited until nightfall to make her move. The manor was quieter after dark, but she knew the staff were still awake, moving behind closed doors. She needed to find someone willing to talk. Her chance came in the form of Marianne, the youngest maid in the house. Emma had noticed her before, a nervous girl, barely in her 20s, with dark eyes that always seemed to flicker with unspoken words. Emma caught her alone in the servants' corridor, carrying a tray of dishes. "Marianne!" Emma whispered urgently, stepping in front of her. The girl startled, nearly dropping the tray. Her wide eyes darted to the shadows. I need to go," Marianne stammered, attempting to sidestep Emma. "Please," Emma begged, lowering her voice. "I need to know what's happening here, about Noah, about Victor." Marianne's hands trembled, her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment Emma thought she would run. But then Marianne's eyes softened and she leaned in closer. "Don't ask questions," she whispered, barely audible. "Not here." Emma's pulse quickened. "Why? What are you all so afraid of?" Marianne swallowed hard. "He listens. Not just Victor. The house." Before Emma could press further, footsteps echoed down the hall. Marianne's eyes widened in panic. "Forget this for your own sake," she hissed, slipping away into the shadows. Emma was left standing alone, the cold air pressing in around her. The staff weren't complicit, they were prisoners. But if Emma couldn't trust them, and she certainly couldn't trust Victor, then who was left? The walls seemed to lean in, whispering in the dark. Maybe she was truly alone. Emma's hands trembled as she unfolded the brittle photograph she had found hidden between the pages of Evelyn's diary. It was old, faded at the edges, but the image was unmistakable. Victor Lancaster stood beside a woman who wasn't Evelyn. This woman had the same distant smile, the same vacant eyes, and next to them a boy. Emma's breath caught. It wasn't Noah, but he looked exactly like him. Same dark hair, same hollow eyes, same, unsettling stillness. She flipped the photograph over, in faded ink, a date, 1974. This was impossible. Noah was only 8. Emma's mind raced. The boxes in the locked room, the photographs, the drawings. Each fragment was a piece of a story Victor had tried to erase, but the truth was bleeding through the cracks. Emma returned to the hidden boxes and pulled another from the shelf. More photographs, more women, more boys, always a mother and child, always Victor. And none of them aged. Noah wasn't the first. There had been others. Emma's stomach turned. What was Victor doing to these children, to these women? Her thoughts spiraled back to Evelyn's final words. The boy, he's not what he seems. Emma didn't want to believe it, but the pieces fit too perfectly. Victor wasn't a grieving father. He was a collector of families, of lives, and Noah was caught in a cycle far darker than Emma could comprehend. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Emma wasn't just fighting to protect Noah, she was fighting to break whatever curse or madness had ensnared this family for decades. But confronting Victor meant risking everything, and Emma knew now that some truths didn't just hurt, they destroyed. Emma stood frozen in the dim corridor, the weight of the truth pressing down on her chest. The photographs, the diary, the endless cycle of families lost. Victor had orchestrated it all. Noah wasn't just sick. He was trapped in something far more sinister, something Emma was only beginning to understand. Her trembling hand hovered over the cold brass doorknob of Noah's room. She could leave now, walk away, pretend none of this ever happened. She would be safe, but Noah wouldn't. Emma pressed her forehead against the door, trying to steady her breath. Run or stay. Her suitcase was still under her bed, half-packed. The gates of the manor were far but not unreachable. She could vanish before anyone noticed. Yet every time she imagined slipping through those gates, Noah's hollow eyes haunted her. His faint whisper echoed in her mind. They watch me when I sleep. Victor would never let him go. And Emma doubted the staff, terrified, silent, would dare to help him. But what could she do? Victor was powerful, dangerous. Emma's mind raced for a plan. She couldn't confront him directly, but maybe she didn't have to. Maybe there was another way. Her eyes drifted to the diary in her hand. Evelyn had left breadcrumbs, warnings, clues. Maybe they could lead her to something Victor feared. Emma straightened her shoulders. She couldn't save Noah if she was dead. She needed to be careful, calculated, but she wouldn't run. Not yet. Her fingers tightened around the diary. If Victor was going to trap them in this nightmare, then she would burn the whole house down before letting him win. Emma turned from the door, her mind sharp, her fear locked away. Tonight, she would fight, or she would die trying. The manor was suffocating in its silence. Every shadow seemed darker now, every creak of the floor heavier. Emma moved through the halls like a ghost, each step deliberate, each breath controlled. The diary pressed against her chest felt heavier than any weapon. She knew Victor was watching, but so was the house. Emma found Noah sitting in the same chair by the window, staring into the endless forest. His small, pale hands clutched the edge of his sketchbook, the pages fluttering with violent, dark spirals. Noah, Emma whispered, kneeling in front of him. We have to go. Now. His dark eyes met hers, blank, but flickering with something. Fear, maybe recognition. Slowly, he closed the sketchbook, but the door behind them groaned open. Victor stood in the doorway, impeccable as always in his tailored suit, but his mask of calm had cracked. His eyes burned with cold fury. You shouldn't have gone digging, Miss Hartley. His voice was calm, but it slithered like ice across her skin. Emma rose to her feet, shielding Noah behind her. I know the truth. Victor tilted his head slightly. Do you? Emma's pulse pounded. She pulled the diary from behind her back and held it up. Evelyn knew about the others, about you. Victor's eyes didn't flicker. That boy isn't your son. Just another piece in whatever this cycle is. A dark smile crept across Victor's lips. No, Emma. Noah isn't my son. He's hers now. Emma's grip on the diary tightened. Suddenly the walls seemed to groan, the floorboards vibrating underfoot. The house shifted. Victor didn't move. "You think this is about me?" he murmured. "This house has been feeding long before I ever walked these halls. Families come, families go. The house chooses who stays." Emma's throat tightened. It chose Noah, and now it's chosen you. A low hum filled the air. The lights flickered. Emma grabbed Noah's hand. "Run!" But Victor didn't chase. He simply watched as they fled, down dark corridors, past locked doors, toward the iron gates that now loomed ahead. But the house fought back. Doors slammed, walls shifted. The manor itself was alive, twisting to trap them inside. Emma pushed forward, dragging Noah toward the light. And then they were outside. The cold air sliced through her lungs as they stumbled onto the gravel driveway. The manor loomed behind them, silent and still. Victor stood at the highest window watching, but he didn't follow, because he didn't need to. Emma knew the truth now, but truth came with a price. And as Noah tightened his grip on her hand, Emma wondered if they had truly escaped, or if the house had simply let them go, for now. Emma stood at the gates of the Lancaster Manor, the cold wind biting at her skin. But it wasn't the wind that made her shiver. The house loomed in the distance, silent and still, yet alive in ways she could no longer deny. She had uncovered the truth, a truth that didn't just haunt the walls, but lived within them, feeding on silence, on fear. And now it knew her name. Noah was safe, for now, his small hand clutching hers tightly. But Emma understood something Victor never had. Some cycles don't break, they wait. The house wasn't finished with them. The whispers might have quieted, but they hadn't stopped. As she turned away from the manor, Emma felt the weight of the truth settle in her chest. She hadn't escaped, she had only been spared. For now, some truths set you free, others follow you home.